So hello, well today I'd like to have a look at these books which I obtained when I was in America in the mid-90s. I went to California, and one of the must-see places for me was the Alcatraz, the Rock. I'd seen the '79 film with Clint Eastwood and was desperate to get there. I mean, it was my most wanted place to visit. And this one was written by a fellow called Jim Quillen. I mean, they all had rather sad tales, these people. They were alive in the day when I was in the US. They sometimes would go to Alcatraz and do book signings, or they would effectively just chat with people about their experiences there. And this chap, I mean, he was the product of a really broken family. His father was an alcoholic or something like that, or his mother, and they were neglected. And to look after his sister, I mean, he was only about 14 or something himself, to look after his young kid sister, he robbed a grocery shop, which was also a post office, and that made it a federal crime or something. He sort of ended up in the prison system. There's not too many pictures in this book, in actual fact. And then thereupon started his road to misery, which ended up at Alcatraz. It was a really interesting place to go, actually. I made a video of it, but I sadly lost it in time. There's just some photos. That's him and his little sister. That's the rock, Alcatraz itself. This is the talking about the 1946 siege, which is when a load of prisoners got together and they tried to break out, and they had to call the American Marines in, and they ended up dead. But not before they'd created carnage. Their names were Kretzer, Hubbard and Coy. Some really hard, nasty people, you know, that's why they were there, of course. And there's the famous Birdman of Alcatraz. He didn't actually keep any birds. And that's Jim Quillen on a sort of visit to Alcatraz later on, when he was a free man, obviously rehabilitated. He ended up becoming an X-ray technology expert, and that's him with his wife, and now his daughter and granddaughter. So there's that one. Oh, did he get pardoned? I can't remember now. Maybe not. Some of them got pardoned, you'd believe it or not, because they did such good. This guy was a real card, Leon Whitey Thompson. I actually met him, and he looks a lot tougher than he. By the time I met him, he was just, he was a much more sort of a much more chillaxed fellow, and he kept wolves, in actual fact. I don't know if he's got any photos at all in his book. And his wife, Helen, bizarrely enough, came from not far from Northwood, where I was from, so we had a lot in common. And I wrote, yeah, that's much more what he looked like when I knew him. A bit older as well. Really laid-back bloke, in actual fact. He was a bank robber. There's him and his wife. Helen, her name was. They're probably gone now. He's definitely gone, unfortunately, died. I mean, she probably has too, because they weren't that young people. And this one was written by a chap called Frank Heaney, who was the youngest guard on the Alcatraz Rock. And that's some sort of cells there. They had these special bars that had a rod inside them. Jimmy! When you tried to cut through, the rod used to spin, so it would stop the saw getting any purchase. So they had all these. It was built in the 30s, but they had all these devices to prevent people from escaping. Nothing more, I suppose, than the actual bay itself, which was a horrific place to swim in, because all the currents are so very strong there, and the water is really cold. I mean, there was the case of the Morris and the Anglin brothers. Was it Frank Morris and Clarence and John Anglin, I think the names were. They broke out and they disappeared, but there's no proof that they escaped. It's more likely they perished in the waters, unfortunately. But they may have got away, but hard to think they did, because such hardened criminals would never not reappear back on the radar, would they, if they were... There they are, the prisoners on the rock. It closed in '63, I think, mainly because it was just dilapidated, the place, and the costs of running it, because there was no fresh water there. So they had to have fresh water shipped across to them, which was really expensive, and it was stored in some tank. Jimmy, stop barking, Bubble. So it started off as a military garrison, I believe. I think Alcatraz is, isn't it the Spanish of penguin, Alcatraz? And I think that's where it got its name from, because penguins used to live on there, or something like that, some sort of seabird anyway. Yeah. The worst place to be was D block, which was like an isolation. There he is, that's the guard, that's a young man. Yeah, the D block was the worst place to be. That was like isolation unit. For when you were, a bad man on Alcatraz, you went into like sort of darkness, were locked into this cold metal cell, often without any kit on as well. So you were really cold. It was a tough place, that's a fact. But these were tough men, no doubt about it. These were tough men. It was the old prison ideal that if the tougher you were, they'd put you into a tougher place. Nowadays, I think they try and rehabilitate people more regularly than... This looks like the D block. Yeah, it is. You can go in there, you can bang the door shut and get the idea how it would be. And yeah, to stay sane, they would do all sorts of oddball things. Like some fellow I remember saying that he used to take a little button in with him, and he'd throw the button into the dark and try and find it, and that would be to keep him from going mad whilst he was locked in there for 2 months or whatever it was. The only time he'd ever see daylight was when they opened the door to give him some food. There's the exercise yard. Yeah. They had a radio in there that you could listen to if you had... the dining hall was the most dangerous place. If you had good behaviour, you could listen to the radio. They gave you some headphones. Each cell had a... well, each cell was unique in the sense that it was individual. They didn't have any sharing. Each prisoner had his own cell. But the dining hall was the most dangerous place, because that's where obviously they assembled, and if one of them went off, you could get some seriously dangerous situations occurring. So there's a typical cell. That was the warden's house, and there they are, the wardens. There were 3 of them: James Johnson, Madigan, and Edwin Swope. It's an interesting name. And the warden's house was burnt down in the 70s when some First Nation Americans were there to protest their land, and they took to Alcatraz Island as a sort of a protest, and the warden's house got burnt down somehow. That's an old factory where they used to work. It was like its own community. There's a guard overlooking from the tower. Golden Gate recreational area now. It's lovely. It's a beautiful place. The Golden Gate area is awesome, in actual fact. Well worth a visit if anybody ever gets over there. There's talking about the bars, so you can freeze on that if you want to. Have a look. Visitation was done through windows and telephony. You didn't actually have any contact with anybody. It must have been quite tough to be on there. So famous prisoners and notorious was Machine Gun Kelly was there. Al Capone was there. Floyd Hamilton, so famous gangsters of the time. Clarence Carnes. Creepy Carpis, what a name, eh? Alvin Carpis. There was even some Nazi spies on there apparently as well. Basil Bankhart. Yep, he was famous, wasn't he? Robert Stroud, the Birdman. That was the siege of 46. So 1 guard killed, 16 injured. See, not a good thing. And that was them, the rotters that were at it. That's the key system. That's the guard had written the names of the prisoners that were most prominent on the wall, you see, to alert the other people who they were, if he was, if something that came to him. And that was the Marines using explosives to calm the event. So there you go. Right, there they were. That's what ended up. That's how they ended up. Sadly, just corpses in the morgue. But oh, there's the escape from Alcatraz. That's the Anglin brothers with Frank Morris, who apparently had an IQ of really high IQ. He was sort of borderline genius. And they used these dummy heads and basic tools to escape from the old building, which by then was sort of falling into disrepair, and they could dig the walls open, and they climbed up onto the roof and then shimmied down drain pipes and jumped into the sea, which of course they never appeared again. So well, there you go. Anyway, I hope you found that of some interest. 3 pretty good books there actually, from Jim Quillen, Leon Whitey Thompson and Frank Heaney. So thanks ever so much as always for watching, and yeah, all the very best. Cheers.